Welcome, today's story is full of drama. Like and subscribe to stay updated. Let's get started.
I remember the first time I saw Sophia. It was a Thursday evening at Sam's, a bar just a few blocks from my apartment. I had gone there alone, as I often did after a long week of working with aerospace-grade designs and lengthy meetings about stealth system maintenance. The place was crowded. A chaotic mix of clinking glasses, loud conversations, and music competing for dominance. Amid the noise, she stood out. Sophia, tall with chestnut hair that shimmered in the dim light, and an effortless confidence in her stance that made it hard not to notice her. She was laughing at something her friend said, and I wished I were the one making her laugh. It took me 5 visits to gather the courage to approach her. Each time, she was there, and each time I convinced myself it wasn't the right moment. On the 6th visit, fate seemed to step in. She was alone at the bar, scrolling through her phone. Before I could second-guess myself, I ordered 2 drinks, a bourbon for me and a glass of Merlot I had seen her sipping on my previous visits. I walked over, placed the wine on the counter next to her, and introduced myself. "Hi, I'm Michael. I couldn't help but notice you." It was cliché, I know, but I was nervous. Sophia looked up, and to my relief, she smiled. "Sophia," she replied, shaking my hand. Her grip was firm, her voice smooth with a playful undertone. "Thanks for the wine, Michael. It's my favorite. How did you know?" "Lucky guess," I said, though my grin probably gave away that I had been paying attention. That night, we talked until closing. When we parted ways, her laughter echoed in my mind like a favorite melody. After a few more chance encounters, I finally asked her out. It wasn't extravagant, just a cozy French bistro that served the best creme brulee I'd ever had. We spent hours talking about everything: her career as an event planner, my work in stealth systems, or at least the parts one could share, and our mutual appreciation for vintage sci-fi films. She was witty, insightful, and had a way of making me feel like the most fascinating person in the room. Over the next 8 months, we fell into a comfortable rhythm. We weren't officially together, but it felt like we were moving in that direction. Still, my job often created barriers. Late nights at the facility or troubleshooting issues with stealth system prototypes left little time for a personal life. Sophia was patient, but I could tell my absences sometimes wore on her. Then came tonight. I was at the lab, finalizing a report on a major flaw in one of the prototypes. The clock had ticked past 8 p.m. when my phone buzzed. It was Sophia. "Hey," she said, her voice softer than usual. "I'm at your place. Hope you don't mind. I thought I'd surprise you." Her words jolted me awake. She'd never done this before, and I wasn't sure whether to be thrilled or uneasy. My apartment wasn't exactly in its best shape. Takeout containers on the counter, unopened mail scattered across the coffee table. Yeah, that's great," I said, trying to sound calm. "I'm just wrapping up here. I'll be home soon." But soon stretched into nearly 2 hours. By the time I left the facility and navigated traffic, it was close to 10:30 p.m. I parked my car, an aging Honda Accord, in the underground lot of my building, grabbed my bag, and took the stairs 2 at a time. My heart raced, though I couldn't pinpoint why. Maybe it was guilt for making her wait, or maybe it was the excitement of seeing her. Or perhaps it was a deeper, unexplainable sense of foreboding. I reached my door and paused to collect myself. Taking a deep breath, I stepped inside. The first thing I noticed was the silence. Not the comfortable kind, but the kind that presses down on you, heavy and unnatural. Then I saw it. A streak of something dark and red on the floor near the entryway. My heart stopped. Instinct screamed at me to call out to Sophia, but something held me back. Moving cautiously, I stepped inside, my eyes scanning the room. More blood. A faint trail leading down the hall. My breath quickened as I followed it, every fiber of my being screaming to turn back. The metallic scent grew stronger with each step. As I reached the living room, a sudden movement behind me made my heart lurch. Before I could react, a sharp pain exploded at the back of my head, and the world went black. When I came to, my head throbbed, and my vision was blurry. 2 figures stood over me. One was holding Sophia by her hair, dragging her into the room. Her face was bruised, her clothes torn. Fury and helplessness surged through me. "So this is him," the larger man sneered, his accent thick. He spat on me. "The one who thought he could take what isn't his." Before I could respond, he struck Sophia again. The sound of the blow was sickening. She crumpled to the floor, motionless. No! I choked, my voice barely audible, the pain in my chest threatening to consume me. Another man stepped into the dim light. His face was lean and cruel, his wrist adorned with a bracelet, a dragon clutching a globe. The image seared itself into my memory. He crouched down, a smirk playing on his lips, and whispered, "Wrong place, wrong time." Before I could process his words, a hammer descended toward my head. Darkness engulfed me. When I woke, the first thing I noticed was heat, a suffocating, all-consuming heat. My eyes fluttered open to the sight of flames licking the walls and smoke filling the air. My body screamed in agony as I tried to move. Every inch of me felt battered and broken. The taste of ash and blood filled my mouth. Distantly, I heard voices shouting, the crack of splintering wood, and the hiss of water meeting fire. Suddenly, strong hands gripped me, pulling me out of the inferno. The cool night air hit my face like a slap, and I coughed violently, my lungs desperate for oxygen. The fire department had arrived. Somehow they'd found me in time. Darkness clung to me in the days that followed. When I finally regained consciousness in the hospital, it felt like clawing my way out of a deep abyss. My eyelids were leaden, but I managed to open them to the sterile white walls of a hospital room. Machines beeped rhythmically around me, a sharp contrast to the chaos I had left behind. A nurse noticed I was awake and rushed to my side. "Mr. Carter, you're awake," she said softly, relief evident in her voice. "You've been in a coma for 4 months. Take it slow." For months. The weight of those words crushed me. For months of my life. Gone in an instant. I tried to move, but my body felt foreign, weak. I looked down at my arms, thin and frail. I was a shadow of the man I had been. The memories of that night hit me like a tidal wave. Sophia's face, her laughter, the sound of the blow that silenced her, and the men who had shattered my world. I tried to push it away, but the images played on a loop in my mind. Flashes of blood, fire, and pain haunted my dreams, and I often woke up drenched in sweat, the echoes of her final moments ringing in my ears. My sister, Emily, was the first familiar face I saw after I was stable. She burst into tears as soon as she saw me, holding me gently as if I might break. "Ethan, I thought we'd lost you," she whispered, her voice trembling. I wanted to reassure her, but the words caught in my throat. I wasn't sure I'd ever be okay. Emily handled the paperwork to transfer me to her house once I was discharged. My apartment was gone, destroyed in the fire. Her home became my refuge, though it felt alien. Physical therapy began almost immediately. The first session was humiliating. I couldn't even stand without help. The therapists were patient, but each step was a painful reminder of how far I'd fallen. Psychotherapy followed soon after. They said I needed to confront my trauma, the nightmares, the guilt, the anger, but I wasn't sure I could. As the weeks turned into months, I fought to reclaim pieces of myself. The scars on my body were stark reminders of what I'd endured, but they became my motivation. I couldn't let that night define me. Slowly, my body grew stronger. My legs regained their stability, my arms their strength. The burn scars on my face and neck, once sources of shame, became badges of survival. A year after the fire, I stood in front of a mirror. The man staring back at me was unrecognizable. Not because of the scars, but because of the determination in his eyes. I wasn't just surviving, I was rebuilding. But the questions still gnawed at me. Who were those men? Why Sophia? Why me? The FBI had visited me in the hospital, their questions circling the same points. Despite my insistence that Sophia was real, they couldn't find any record of her. No missing person report, no identification. It was as if she had never existed. 2 days after being discharged, I returned to the bar where I had first met Sophia. The place felt different, colder, emptier, as though it too mourned her absence. I approached the bartender, hoping for answers. "Do you remember a woman named Sophia?" I asked, describing her in as much detail as I could. He frowned, polishing a glass. "Yeah, I remember her. She used to come in here alone, quiet. But she'd leave with different guys sometimes, not always the same ones." His words hit me like a punch. My mind raced. Who were these men? Could they have been connected to what happened? I pressed him for more information, but he shrugged. "Sorry, man. I just serve drinks." Frustrated but determined, I turned to the bar's security staff. After slipping the bouncer some cash, I gained access to the grainy security footage. Hours of footage later, I found her, Sophia, entering the bar alone. A car parked out front caught my eye. "Can you zoom in on the plates?" I asked. The resolution was too poor, but the bouncer recognized the car. "That's a Lincoln Revere," he said. "Belongs to a guy who used to come around. Said he worked with her. Weird dude." That lead brought me to a suburban house in another part of town, where a man named Marcus Delaney answered the door. His expression darkened when I mentioned the car. "That car? It was stolen months ago," he said, his tone wary. "I filed a police report, but it turned up wrecked in a river." Pieces of the puzzle began to form, but they didn't yet make sense. Determined to uncover the truth, I followed every lead, no matter how faint. The trail led me to a junkyard on the outskirts of town, where the remains of the stolen car had been towed. The air was thick with the smell of oil and rust as I navigated the maze of wreckage. I found the car cordoned off with caution tape, a twisted hulk of metal, its windows shattered and its interior gutted. The lingering stench of river water still clung to it. Wearing gloves, I began searching the interior, ignoring the curious stares of the yard's attendant. The car was a mess, waterlogged and coated in grime. But in the glove compartment, I found something. 2 cards, damp but still legible. One was for a lawyer, Elise Hartwell, and the other bore a name that sent a chill down my spine. Sebastian Moreau, Marketing Director, Arkham Textiles. The next morning, I visited the address on the card for Arkham Textiles, only to find an abandoned building. Weeds pushed through cracks in the concrete, and the faded sign over the entrance looked like it hadn't been touched in years. A nearby shopkeeper told me the business had closed down over a decade ago. Frustration boiled inside me. Another dead end. The lawyer's office, however, was still active. Elise Hartwell worked in a modest brick building nestled between a bakery and a small law firm. When I explained I was looking for information about Sophia, the receptionist frowned and checked her computer. "I'm sorry," she said after a moment. "We don't have any record of a client named Sophia. Do you have a last name or case file?" I clenched my jaw. "No, but she gave me this card. She must have been in contact with someone here." The receptionist examined the card and shook her head. "This is one of our standard cards. Without more details, I'm afraid there's nothing we can do." Defeated, I left the office. The walls of my investigation felt like they were closing in on me. Every lead had crumbled into dust, and I was left chasing shadows. My sister, Emily, tried to convince me to let it go. "Ethan, you've been through enough," she said one evening, her voice firm yet gentle. "You need to focus on healing, not chasing a ghost." Part of me knew she was right, but the nagging feeling that I was missing something wouldn't let me rest. That night, unable to sleep, I went for a walk. The streets were quiet, the crisp air biting at my skin. As I turned a corner, I saw a boy playing basketball in a driveway. His laughter echoed in the stillness, a sound so innocent it seemed out of place in my fractured reality. The ball rolled toward me, stopping at my feet. I picked it up and handed it to him with a small smile. "Here you go, kid," I said. He smiled and took the ball, but something caught my eye. A bracelet on his wrist. A small dragon clutching a globe. The image seared itself into my mind. The same design I'd seen that night in my apartment. I watched as the boy ran back toward the house, my stomach sinking when I saw which house he entered. It was the same house where the owner of the wrecked car had lived. The coincidence was too great to ignore. Over the next 2 weeks, I made it my mission to watch the house. I tracked their movements, noting their routines. The man, Marcus, rarely left except for errands. The boy went to school each morning, and they returned by the same time each evening. At night, however, things became unusual. Around midnight, Marcus would slip out of the house and drive to various locations: warehouses, industrial parks, and once, a secluded dockyard. It was on the 11th night that I saw something truly suspicious. Marcus met with another man in a dark sedan. Their conversation seemed tense, and they exchanged a briefcase before parting ways. I snapped photos of the meeting, including the license plate of the sedan. I knew I needed more evidence before confronting him. The following day, I decided it was time to act. Armed with a recording device and a loaded Glock tucked into my jacket, I knocked on Marcus's door. When he opened it, his expression turned wary. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone cautious. We need to talk, I said, stepping inside before he could protest. The conversation quickly escalated. Marcus denied knowing Sophia or anything about the bracelet. But when I showed him the photos of his late-night meetings, his demeanor shifted. His hands trembled, and sweat beaded on his forehead. You don't understand, he finally said, his voice shaking. I had no choice. Explain? I demanded, my hand inching toward the Glock. He sighed heavily and began to speak. What he told me made my blood run cold. Marcus wasn't just an ordinary man. He had been coerced into working for a shadowy organization connected to Sophia. She had been involved in something far more complex than I'd realized. A tangled web of espionage, betrayal, and high-stakes operations. She wasn't who you thought she was, Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. And if you keep digging, they'll come for you too. Before I could press him further, the sound of tires screeching outside sent a jolt of fear through both of us. Men in black tactical gear burst through the door, guns drawn. I raised my hands instinctively as they stormed in, their eyes scanning the room. You've made a mistake, one of them said, his gaze locking onto me. This isn't your fight. The men in tactical gear moved swiftly, their weapons trained on both Marcus and me. My heart raced as I tried to process what was happening. One of them, a tall man with a scar across his jaw, gestured for me to kneel. Hands behind your head, he barked, his voice cold and commanding. I complied, my mind scrambling for a plan. Two of the men grabbed Marcus, forcing him to his knees. He looked terrified, sweat dripping down his face as he stammered incoherently. The leader of the group turned to me, his expression unreadable. This doesn't concern you, he said. Walk away now, and you won't get hurt. Walk away? I said, my voice steady despite the chaos around me. Not until I know the truth about Sophia. The man's eyes narrowed. You don't know what you're talking about. Leave it alone. Like hell I will, I snapped. I've been through too much to stop now. Who was she? Why was she targeted? The leader sighed, his frustration evident. He motioned for one of his men to restrain me, but I didn't resist. As they zip-tied my wrists, he crouched down to my level, his voice lowering. You're chasing a ghost, Carter. Sophia wasn't who you thought she was. She was involved in things you can't begin to understand. Then help me understand, I demanded. The man hesitated, then nodded toward one of his subordinates. Bring him, he ordered. Before I knew it, they were dragging both Marcus and me outside to a black SUV parked near the curb. They shoved us into the back, and the vehicle sped off into the night. The silence was oppressive as the city lights blurred past the tinted windows. We arrived at a nondescript warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Inside, the air was cold, and the walls were lined with metal shelving and surveillance equipment. They shoved Marcus into a separate room, leaving me alone with the leader. He pulled up a chair and sat across from me, his piercing gaze locking onto mine. Sophia was an operative, he said finally. She worked for an international network specializing in counterespionage. Her role was to gather intelligence on certain individuals, like you. I felt my stomach drop. Me? Why? You're involved in classified technology, Carter. Stealth systems, advanced codings, it's valuable and it's dangerous. People like Sophia are trained to get close to assets like you, to extract information without you even realizing it. My mind reeled. So she was using me? Everything we had. Was it all fake? The man's expression softened, but only slightly. Not all of it. Operatives like her are trained to blend in, to make connections that feel real. Sometimes they are real, but her assignment went sideways. She got caught up in something bigger than she could handle. Who killed her? I demanded, anger boiling to the surface. The man leaned back, crossing his arms. That's the part we're still piecing together. The group that targeted you, her killers, they wanted more than just her out of the way. They wanted to send a message. We think Marcus was a loose end. I clenched my fists. And you're just letting them get away with it? His jaw tightened. It's not that simple. These people operate in shadows. Taking them down requires precision, not recklessness. I stared at him, my heart pounding. Then let me help. He laughed bitterly. You're not equipped for this, Carter. You're lucky you're alive. The best thing you can do is walk away. No, I said firmly. I owe her that much. She might have been using me, but I cared about her. If there's a chance to bring her killers to justice, I'm taking it. The leader studied me for a long moment before finally nodding. You're stubborn, I'll give you that. Fine. But if you're coming with us, you follow orders. No questions, no improvisation. Deal, I said, my voice resolute. The leader's stern gaze bore into me as he spoke. You'll need to understand this. Once you're in, there's no turning back. If you cross the line, you're as much a target as the rest of us. I nodded, my resolve firm. Just tell me where to start. He signaled to one of the men standing by the door. They brought in a thin folder and placed it on the table in front of me. The man flipped it open to reveal photos, reports, and a map. This is where it begins, he said, tapping the map. A warehouse in Midtown. That's where we believe they're holding some of the documents Sophia was carrying. But you won't go alone. If you want to do this, you'll be working under my command. I glanced at the map. The location wasn't far, but it was heavily marked with notes about security details and shifts. The reality of what I was getting into hit me like a weight, but I knew I couldn't back out now. When do we go? I asked. Tomorrow night, he said. You'll meet us here at 11 p.m. sharp. Bring nothing but yourself. We'll provide the rest. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. This was it. My chance to finally uncover the truth about Sophia and the men who had taken her life. The following night, I arrived at the warehouse as instructed. A sleek black SUV was parked near the entrance, its tinted windows hiding the team inside. As I approached, the back door opened, and the leader stepped out. Right on time, he said, handing me a small earpiece and a vest. The rest of the team moved with precision, their movements silent and calculated. I followed their lead, feeling like an outsider in a world I barely understood. Inside the warehouse, the air was damp and heavy with the scent of oil and metal. The team spread out, their flashlights casting eerie beams across the abandoned space. My heart raced as we approached a door marked with a red symbol, a dragon clutching a globe. The leader gestured for us to stop. This is it, he whispered. Stay close and don't make a sound. He signaled to one of the team members who carefully picked the lock. The door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit room filled with filing cabinets and surveillance equipment. My eyes immediately caught a familiar item on one of the desks. A bracelet, identical to the one the boy had worn. I picked it up, my hands trembling. This is the same one, I muttered. The leader frowned. Don't touch anything. We need to document this first. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway. My pulse quickened as the team drew their weapons, their movements fluid and controlled. The leader motioned for us to take cover as voices grew louder. Two men entered the room, their faces hidden by masks. One carried a briefcase while the other gestured toward the surveillance equipment. My fingers itched to act, but the leader's sharp gaze warned me to stay still. Get the files and let's go, one of the men said, his voice muffled. As they began rifling through the cabinets, the leader whispered into his earpiece. On my mark. The tension was unbearable. My grip tightened on the vest, my breath shallow as I prepared for whatever came next. Mark! The leader shouted. The team moved as one, storming the room with precision. Chaos erupted as the masked men drew their weapons, firing blindly. I ducked behind a cabinet, the sound of gunfire deafening. Within moments, the team subdued the men, pinning them to the ground. The leader approached one of them, pulling off his mask to reveal a face I recognized instantly. Marcus. My heart stopped. You again, I muttered, my voice shaking. Marcus sneered, blood trickling from a cut on his lip. You should have stayed out of this, Carter. You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into. The leader grabbed him by the collar. Start talking. Who are you working for? Marcus laughed bitterly. You think this ends here? You're all dead already. Every single one of you. The leader's grip tightened, but Marcus refused to say anything else. One of the team members sedated him, and his body went limp. The leader signaled for the team to secure the room. Two operatives dragged Marcus to a corner, zip-tying his wrists as his unconscious body slumped against the wall. My heart was racing, my mind reeling from the realization that Marcus was deeply involved in whatever shadowy operation had cost Sophia her life. Check the briefcase, the leader ordered, motioning to one of the team members. The operative cracked open the briefcase with practiced efficiency. Inside were documents, a flash drive, and a small black notebook with an embossed dragon logo, the same emblem from the bracelet and the warehouse door. "What is that?" I asked, stepping closer. The leader held up a hand, stopping me. "This is classified," he said firmly. "We'll debrief you later." I clenched my fists, frustration boiling over. "Don't shut me out. I've come this far. I deserve to know what's going on." The leader's gaze hardened. "You're out of your depth, Carter. Stay in your lane, or you'll end up like Sophia." His words were like a punch to the gut. Before I could respond, the earpiece crackled to life. "We've got company," a voice warned. "Two SUVs pulling up to the perimeter. Looks like reinforcements." "Move," the leader barked. "Secure the intel and prepare for exfil." The team sprang into action, gathering the documents and equipment with military precision. The tension in the room was palpable as the sound of car doors slamming outside grew louder. Shadows flickered through the dusty windows as armed men approached the warehouse. "Carter, stay close," the leader ordered, his voice sharp. I nodded, adrenaline surging through me. The team formed a defensive perimeter as the first gunshot rang out, shattering the warehouse's silence. Bullets ricocheted off metal shelves, and the air filled with the acrid smell of gunpowder. I ducked behind a cabinet, my heart pounding. The leader returned fire, his movements precise and controlled. The team fought back fiercely, their training evident in every action. But the attackers were relentless, their numbers overwhelming. "Fall back," the leader shouted. "We can't hold this position." The team began retreating toward an exit at the back of the warehouse. I followed closely, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. As we reached the door, an explosion rocked the building, throwing me off balance. The heat and shockwave knocked me to the ground, and my vision blurred. When I came to, the warehouse was a scene of chaos. Flames licked the walls, and smoke filled the air. The leader was pulling me to my feet, his expression grim. "Move!" he yelled, dragging me toward the exit. We stumbled into the night, gunfire still echoing behind us. The team had managed to reach the extraction point, where a black van waited with its engine running. We piled in, the tires screeching as we sped away from the burning warehouse. Back at the safe house, the atmosphere was tense. The leader spread the recovered documents across a table, his expression unreadable. I stood off to the side, my hands trembling from the adrenaline crash. "What did we find?" one of the operatives asked. The leader held up the black notebook. "This might be the key," he said. "It's a list of names, coordinates, and encrypted codes." I stepped forward. "What kind of names?" The leader hesitated, then flipped open the notebook. My blood ran cold when I saw one of the entries, Ethan Carter, research asset. "What the hell is this?" I demanded, pointing to my name. The leader's expression darkened. "It means you weren't just a target of opportunity. They've been watching you for a long time." The room fell silent as my name stared back at me from the black notebook. My pulse quickened, and I could feel the blood drain from my face. "They've been watching me?" I said, my voice low and shaking. "Why? What do they want with me?" The leader didn't answer right away. He closed the notebook, his movements deliberate, and looked at me with an intensity that made my stomach churn. "It's not just you," he said finally. "They've been tracking anyone with access to advanced defense technologies, especially those tied to stealth systems. You were flagged as an asset, not because of who you are, but because of what you know." I took a step back, my mind racing. "So, Sophia, was she sent to get close to me? Was she part of this?" "Yes," he admitted, his tone cold. "But it wasn't supposed to end the way it did. Her handlers wanted information, not bloodshed. Something changed. Someone else intervened." "Someone like Marcus?" I pressed, gesturing toward the notebook. "Exactly," the leader said, his expression hardening. "Marcus and his group are part of a rogue faction. They're not just after your knowledge, they're after control of the entire network you're tied to. And now they know we're onto them." I let the words sink in, the weight of it all pressing down on me. Sophia's death, the attack on my apartment, the stolen car. It was all part of a larger game, one I didn't even realize I was playing. "What's the next move?" I asked, my voice steady despite the chaos in my mind. The leader smirked faintly. "You've already crossed the line, Carter. There's no going back. If you want to see this through, you'll need to step up." I nodded, my resolve solidifying. Tell me what to do. The next day, I was briefed on the operation. The notebook had revealed a series of safe houses and rendezvous points used by Marcus's group. The closest location was a secluded estate on the outskirts of a city called Edgehaven. It was heavily fortified, but the team believed it held critical information about the rogue faction's operations, and possibly a direct link to Sophia's death. As we prepared to leave, the leader handed me a small pistol and a Kevlar vest. You'll stay at the back of the team, he instructed. Your job is to observe and provide backup if necessary. No heroics. Understood, I said, securing the vest. The ride to Edgehaven was tense. The team exchanged minimal words, their focus razor-sharp. When we arrived, the estate loomed in the distance, surrounded by high walls and dense forest. The leader handed out earpieces, and we moved in under the cover of darkness. Inside the perimeter, the team moved with precision, neutralizing guards with silenced weapons. My heart pounded as I followed their lead, every step feeling like a plunge into the unknown. We reached the main building without incident. The leader gestured for us to split into 2 groups. I stayed with him as we entered a side door, the faint glow of security monitors lighting the hallway. The leader motioned for silence as we approached a locked door. One of the operatives picked the lock and we slipped inside. The room was filled with computers and filing cabinets, clearly a command center. On one of the monitors, I saw a live feed of another room where Marcus was seated, his hands cuffed to a table. He's here, I whispered, my adrenaline spiking. The leader nodded, his focus on the documents scattered across a desk. He flipped through them quickly, pulling out pages with coordinates and names. One of the pages caught my eye. It had Sophia's name at the top, followed by the words terminated. Liability. I clenched my fists, rage bubbling to the surface. They ordered her death, I muttered. Before the leader could respond, a loud alarm blared through the estate. Red lights flashed, and the sound of boots echoed in the hallways. They know we're here, the leader said, his voice calm but urgent. Grab what you can and move. I stuffed as many documents as I could into a bag, my hands trembling. The team regrouped outside the command center, weapons drawn as guards closed in. The firefight that followed was a blur of chaos and noise. Bullets ricocheted off walls, and shouts filled the air. I stayed close to the leader, firing when necessary, but my focus was on surviving. As we reached the exit, the leader stopped abruptly. Go, he said, shoving the bag of documents into my arms. Get out of here. What about you? I yelled over the gunfire. I'll cover you, he said, already turning back toward the advancing guards. Reluctantly, I ran, following the others as we retreated into the forest. When we finally reached the extraction point, the van was waiting, its engine running. I climbed in, my chest heaving as I tried to catch my breath. The leader didn't make it back. Back at the safe house, I sat at a table, the bag of documents in front of me. As I sorted through them, one thing became clear. This wasn't just about me or Sophia. The rogue faction was targeting multiple individuals connected to classified technology, and their reach was far more extensive than I'd imagined. Among the documents was a photo of Marcus, standing next to a man I didn't recognize. Scribbled on the back were the words, Damien Moreau, primary operative. It was the boy from the house, the boy with the bracelet. My heart sank as I realized the truth. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. The revelation hit me like a freight train. Damien Moreau, the boy I had seen wearing the bracelet, the same boy who had looked at me with defiance and grief, was not just an innocent bystander. He was deeply involved, perhaps even orchestrating parts of this twisted operation. The photograph of him standing beside Marcus confirmed it. I sat in the dimly lit room, staring at the documents spread out before me. The weight of everything I had uncovered pressed heavily on my chest. This wasn't just about vengeance for Sophia anymore. It was about unraveling a conspiracy far larger than I had anticipated. One of the operatives entered the room, snapping me out of my thoughts. Carter, you need to see this, she said, holding out a tablet. I took it and looked at the screen. A live feed showed Damien Moreau at a private airstrip. He was boarding a small jet, flanked by 2 heavily armed guards. This was intercepted 20 minutes ago, the operative said. We tracked the jet's flight plan. It's heading to Moscow. Moscow, I repeated, my mind racing. The operative nodded. Damien's been moving pieces internationally for months. If he's returning to Moscow, it's for something big. The leader's words echoed in my mind. Once you're in, there's no turning back. I clenched my fists. What's the plan? She hesitated. We've forwarded this to command. They'll decide how to proceed. But if you're asking me, this is above our pay grade. We're not equipped for an international operation. I stood abruptly. Then I'll go alone. She frowned, crossing her arms. That's suicide, Carter. Damien's not just a kid with a vendetta. He's connected to powerful people. You walk into Moscow chasing him, you won't come out. Maybe, I said, grabbing the notebook from the table and stuffing it into a bag. But I can't let this go. If Damien is behind what happened to Sophia, or if he knows who is, I have to confront him. She shook her head, but there was a glimmer of respect in her eyes. If you're serious about this, take these. She handed me a file folder. Inside were blueprints, dossiers, and surveillance photos of Damien's suspected contacts in Moscow. This is all we've got, she said. And it's not much. You're flying blind out there. Thanks, I said, slinging the bag over my shoulder. 2 days later, I was on a flight to Moscow, the city's sprawling skyline coming into view as the plane descended. My heart pounded with anticipation and fear. This was it, the endgame. I checked into a small, nondescript hotel near the outskirts of the city. The room was sparse but functional. I laid out the documents on the bed, studying the faces and locations tied to Damien's network. One name stood out. Ivan Kovalev, a former GRU operative and Damien's closest ally. The file included an address, a warehouse on the edge of the Moskva River. It was listed as a distribution hub for a shipping company, but the surveillance photos suggested something far more sinister. Trucks entered and exited at all hours, and armed guards patrolled the perimeter. That night, under the cover of darkness, I made my way to the warehouse. The cold air bit at my skin as I crouched behind a stack of shipping containers, watching the guards move in predictable patterns. When the moment was right, I slipped through a side entrance, my footsteps silent on the concrete floor. Inside, the warehouse was a labyrinth of crates and machinery. The hum of equipment echoed faintly as I moved deeper into the building. My goal was simple: find Damien and get answers. I rounded a corner and froze. Damien stood at the far end of the room, his back to me. He was speaking to a group of men, gesturing toward a table covered in maps and documents. His voice was calm, but there was an intensity in his posture that made my stomach churn. I drew my weapon, stepping into the open. Damien. He turned slowly, his expression unreadable. The men beside him tensed, their hands hovering near their holstered weapons. You shouldn't have come, Damien said, his voice eerily calm. You don't understand what you're involved in. Then explain it to me, I said, my gun trained on him. Why did Sophia have to die? What is all of this about? Damien took a step closer, ignoring the tension in the room. Sophia was a pawn, just like you. She got too close to the truth, and the people above me decided she was a liability. I felt a surge of anger. And you're okay with that? With killing innocent people to protect some twisted agenda? Innocent? Damien laughed bitterly. You think any of us are innocent in this game? You think Sophia was just some victim? She played her part, just like you're playing yours now. I shook my head, my grip tightening on the gun. I don't care about your excuses. I came for the truth. Tell me who ordered her death. Damien's eyes narrowed. You're not ready for that truth, Carter. Walk away while you still can. I'm not walking away, I said firmly. The tension snapped like a rubber band. One of the men reached for his weapon, but before he could draw, I fired a warning shot into the air. Enough, I shouted. This ends now. Damien raised a hand, stopping his men. You want the truth? Fine. But you won't like what you find. He gestured toward the table. The people who killed Sophia are the same people who sent her to you in the first place. They work for the same government you've been serving all along. My breath caught. What are you talking about? You think this is about stealth technology? Defense contracts? Damien said, his voice rising. It's bigger than that. Your government has been playing both sides, using people like Sophia to manipulate enemies and allies alike. She was expendable the moment she stopped being useful. The weight of his words hit me like a blow. My mind raced, trying to reconcile the truth with everything I thought I knew. Before I could respond, the sound of sirens pierced the air. Damien smirked. "Looks like you've run out of time, Carter." The wail of the sirens grew louder, the flashing blue and red lights spilling into the dimly lit warehouse. Damien's smirk widened, an unnerving confidence in his demeanor as if he had anticipated this exact moment. "You see, Carter," he said, his tone almost mocking, "no matter which side you think you're on, you're always playing for theirs. The question is, are you ready to accept it?" I tightened my grip on the gun, my chest heaving with adrenaline. The sirens were closer now, echoing through the cavernous space, and I knew our time was running out. The guards around Damien exchanged uneasy glances, their confidence visibly shaken. Damien, however, remained calm, as though he held a trump card no one else could see. "What happens now?" I asked, my voice hard but betraying the gnawing uncertainty in my gut. Damien spread his arms, his smile sharp. "That's up to you. You can pull that trigger and seal your fate, or you can walk away and live long enough to realize the truth on your own terms. Either way, you'll learn the same lesson eventually. The game doesn't end, it only changes." The air was electric, charged with the tension of unspoken decisions. I wanted answers, but I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on me. What if Damien was right? What if the lines I thought divided friend and foe were far blurrier than I could have imagined? The sirens abruptly stopped, replaced by the sound of car doors slamming and heavy boots hitting the ground. The warehouse filled with muffled commands shouted in Russian. Damien's men moved to defensive positions, but their body language revealed hesitation. Damien took one last step toward me, his voice dropping to a whisper. "This is your last chance, Carter. Do you want to keep playing the pawn? Or are you ready to learn what it's like to be the player?" I froze. The weight of his question wasn't just rhetorical, it was a challenge. Before I could answer, the doors to the warehouse burst open, and heavily armed men stormed in, their movements precise and intimidating. A mix of Russian special forces and unidentified operatives filled the space, shouting orders and quickly disarming Damien's guards. One of the officers barked something in Russian, pointing directly at me. "Hands up!" a voice commanded in accented English. Damien stepped back into the shadows, his smirk unwavering. "Good luck, Carter," he said, disappearing into the chaos. I raised my hands, my weapon clattering to the floor. Two operatives grabbed me, their grips firm but not rough. As they began dragging me toward the entrance, I craned my neck to look back, hoping to catch one last glimpse of Damien. He was gone, swallowed by the maze of the warehouse. The next thing I knew, I was sitting in a stark interrogation room, the fluorescent lights casting a cold, sterile glow over the metal table in front of me. Across from me sat a man in an impeccably tailored suit, his expression unreadable but his presence exuding authority. "You've found yourself in quite the predicament, Mr. Carter," he began, his voice smooth but laced with an undertone of menace. "Do you know who you're dealing with?" "Damien Moreau," I said flatly, "and whoever's pulling his strings." The man's lips curled into a faint smile. "Good. You're smarter than most, but you're still missing the bigger picture." I leaned forward, my frustration boiling over. "Then why don't you fill me in? Because all I've seen so far is lies, betrayal, and a whole lot of bodies in the wake of people like you." The man chuckled, a low, almost condescending sound. "You still think there are good guys and bad guys in this game? Let me assure you, Mr. Carter, there aren't. There are only those who adapt and those who don't." "What do you want from me?" I demanded, my voice sharp. He slid a file across the table, his gaze never leaving mine. "We want you to join us. You have the skills, the knowledge, and most importantly, the motivation to thrive in this world. You've already proven you're willing to go to extraordinary lengths for the truth." I stared at the file, the weight of the decision looming over me. "And if I say no?" The man's smile faded, replaced by an icy calm. "Then you'll be left to fend for yourself. And trust me, Carter, you won't last long." I stared at the file on the table, its edges crisp and unassuming, yet it carried the weight of a life-altering decision. The man across from me leaned back in his chair, his calm demeanor betraying a sense of control he clearly enjoyed. "You have two choices, Carter," he said, his voice measured. "Join us, and you'll gain the resources, knowledge, and protection to navigate this world. Or refuse, and you'll be left exposed to forces that won't hesitate to eliminate you." I took a deep breath, my gaze flicking to the file. "What exactly are you offering?" The man's lips curled into a faint smile. A way forward. You've already proven your resourcefulness and tenacity. Those qualities can serve you well if you align yourself with the right people. Our organization operates in the shadows, ensuring global stability by managing the chaos others create. And Damien Moreau? I asked, my voice tight. What's your role in his operations? And why did Sophia have to die? The man's smile faltered slightly, replaced by a calculating expression. Damien is an anomaly, an outlier who slipped through the cracks. His operations have become increasingly erratic, and his goals diverge from ours. As for Sophia, her death was unfortunate but necessary. She became a liability. A liability to who? I pressed, anger boiling beneath the surface. To the balance, he said simply. Sometimes, sacrifices must be made to preserve the greater good. Surely, you've learned that by now. The words struck a nerve, but I forced myself to stay calm. And if I join you? What happens to Damien? You'll have the opportunity to help us neutralize him, the man said. Permanently, but you'll do it under our guidance. No more solo missions, no more reckless investigations. You'll have a purpose, a role in something much larger than yourself. The room fell silent as his words sank in. This was my chance to get answers, to uncover the truth about Sophia's death and the forces manipulating my life. But the cost was undeniable. My autonomy, my morals, perhaps even my soul. I leaned back in my chair, my mind racing. And if I refuse? The man's expression turned cold. Then you'll be deemed a risk, a loose end we can't afford to leave untied. You won't walk out of this room alive, Carter. That's not a threat. It's a fact. I clenched my fists under the table, the weight of his words sinking in. This wasn't just a decision, it was survival. After a long silence, I finally spoke. I'll join. The man's smile returned, this time with a hint of satisfaction. Wise choice, Carter. You'll find this path far more rewarding than you might think. He slid the file closer to me. Inside were forms, briefing documents, and a small black card with a number embossed on it. This is your entry point, he said, nodding to the card. Memorize the number. It's your new identity within our network. Destroy the card afterward. I picked it up, my fingers trembling slightly. The number was simple, yet it carried an eerie finality. And what's my first mission? The man leaned forward, his voice low and deliberate. Damien Moreau is your target. We've tracked his movements to a fortified compound outside Moscow. Your job is to infiltrate, extract any critical intel, and eliminate him. Do this, and you'll secure your place in the organization. And if I fail? I asked. The man's smile didn't falter. Failure isn't an option. The next few days were a whirlwind of preparation. I was provided with state-of-the-art equipment, detailed maps of the compound, and a team of operatives to assist me. Despite the resources at my disposal, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into a trap. On the night of the mission, we approached the compound under the cover of darkness. The air was cold, and the tension among the team was palpable. As we breached the perimeter, I felt a strange mix of fear and determination. This was my chance to end it, to confront Damien and get the answers I needed. The compound was a maze of corridors and heavily armed guards. We moved swiftly, neutralizing threats as we advanced toward the central control room. When we reached it, Damien was waiting. He stood in the center of the room, his posture relaxed despite the guns trained on him. So, they sent you, he said, his tone dripping with disdain. I told you, Carter, you're just a pawn in their game. This ends now, I said, stepping forward. Damien's smirk widened. You still don't get it, do you? You think you're here to stop me, but the truth is you're here because they want you to be. They've played us both. Enough, I snapped. Who ordered Sophia's death? Tell me or I swear I'll. Damien laughed bitterly. You already know the answer, Carter. Look in the mirror. You're one of them now. Before I could respond, an explosion rocked the compound, sending us all to the ground. Smoke filled the room, and chaos erupted as alarms blared. The explosion threw me to the ground, the force rattling my senses and leaving my ears ringing. Smoke billowed through the room, obscuring my view of Damien and the operatives. Coughing and disoriented, I scrambled to my feet, my weapon clutched tightly in my hand. Status check. I shouted into my earpiece, but static was the only response. Through the haze, I saw Damien standing amidst the chaos, completely unfazed. His smirk was gone, replaced by a steely determination. He grabbed a briefcase from the table, his movements calm and deliberate despite the pandemonium. "Damien!" I yelled, raising my weapon. "Stop!" He turned to face me, his eyes sharp and cold. "You think this ends with me? You're still blind, Carter. They've already won." With that, he bolted toward a side exit, disappearing into the smoke. I gave chase, adrenaline surging through my veins. My boots pounded against the concrete as I followed him down a narrow hallway, the walls trembling with aftershocks from the explosion. Ahead, Damien reached a reinforced steel door. He keyed in a code, and the door began to slide open. I sprinted toward him, raising my weapon, but he stepped through just as the door slammed shut behind him. "Damn it!" I growled, slamming my fist against the cold steel. I spun around, searching for another way out. The compound was a labyrinth, and the smoke made it nearly impossible to see. My earpiece crackled to life, a faint voice breaking through the static. "Carter, evac point, northeast corner, 2 minutes." It was one of the operatives. I didn't have much time. Reluctantly, I turned away from the sealed door and made my way toward the extraction point, navigating through debris and smoke-filled corridors. When I finally emerged into the crisp night air, the operatives were already loading into the extraction vehicles. The leader of the team, a woman named Ashford, waved me over. "Move, Carter!" she shouted, her voice cutting through the noise of helicopters overhead. I climbed into the back of the SUV as it roared to life, the tires kicking up dirt and gravel. As we sped away from the compound, I glanced back, watching the structure collapse in on itself. Whatever Damien had planned, he'd left destruction in his wake. Back at the safe house, the atmosphere was grim. The mission had been a failure, Damien had escaped, and the intel we recovered was minimal at best. The operatives moved with a mechanical efficiency, tending to their wounds and analyzing the few scraps of information we had managed to extract. Ashford approached me, her expression unreadable. "Damien got away, but we'll track him down. He's not invincible." "Neither are we," I muttered, the weight of failure heavy on my shoulders. She placed a hand on my shoulder, her grip firm. "This isn't over, Carter. But you need to be ready for what's coming. Damien isn't just running, he's preparing for something big. We'll need you when the time comes." I nodded, though my mind was elsewhere. Damien's words echoed in my head. "You think you're here to stop me, but the truth is you're here because they want you to be." What if he was right? What if this entire mission was another manipulation, another move in a game I barely understood? Later that night, I sat alone in the safe house, staring at the black notebook. The names and coordinates it contained were a roadmap to something larger, something I had barely begun to grasp. Sophia's name, the words terminated, liability, and my own name as a research asset loomed large in my mind. I flipped to a page I hadn't noticed before. It was a simple list of initials, followed by cryptic notes and dates. One set of initials caught my eye. DM, final phase activated. Damien Moreau wasn't running. He was executing a plan, and I was still playing catch-up. I clenched my fists, a mix of anger and determination burning in my chest. If Damien wanted me to see the truth, I would. But it wouldn't be on his terms, it would be on mine. The realization that Damien wasn't merely fleeing but methodically executing a plan sent a jolt of urgency through me. If he had activated something called the final phase, it meant whatever he was orchestrating was reaching its climax. And if the people I was working with truly wanted him stopped, they were running out of time. I stared at the black notebook, the initials DM and the cryptic phrase final phase activated burning into my thoughts. There was more to uncover here, and I wasn't going to wait for orders. Damien had made it personal, not just because of Sophia, but because of the way he mocked me, twisted my perception of loyalty, and left me grasping for answers. The next day, while the others were still analyzing the scant intel from the failed mission, I decided to act. One of the documents we'd recovered from the warehouse included partial coordinates, latitude and longitude numbers scribbled hastily on the back of a torn map. Cross-referencing it with a location tool, I found the coordinates pointed to a secluded facility near the Kazakh border. It wasn't far from where we believed Damien's network operated a secondary hub. I knew I wouldn't get approval to go there, so I didn't ask. I gathered what gear I could carry: a handgun, a comm device, a basic survival kit, and left the safe house without informing anyone. Ashford would be furious, but I couldn't let bureaucracy slow me down. Every second counted. The journey to the coordinates was grueling. After landing in a small town near the border, I hired a local guide to drive me as close as possible to the location. The dirt roads became rougher and narrower the farther we went, until we reached a point where even the rugged vehicle couldn't proceed. "This is as far as I go," the guide said, his voice edged with fear. "People don't come back from there." I nodded, paying him in cash and stepping out into the barren, windswept landscape. The facility was hidden in a valley surrounded by jagged cliffs, a natural fortress that provided both cover and defense. The air was cold, and the silence was oppressive as I made my way closer. As night fell, I reached the perimeter of the facility. From my vantage point on a rocky outcrop, I could see floodlights scanning the area, patrolling guards armed with automatic weapons, and security cameras covering every possible entry point. This wasn't a hideout, it was a fortress. I adjusted my binoculars, scanning for vulnerabilities. Near the southern side of the compound, I noticed a delivery truck pulling up to a heavily guarded gate. The guards inspected the truck briefly before waving it through. It disappeared into an underground loading bay. That was my way in. Disguised as a maintenance worker, I waited for the next delivery truck. When it stopped near the gate for inspection, I climbed onto its undercarriage, clinging to the axles as it rumbled forward. My body ached from the effort, but the gamble paid off. The truck rolled into the underground bay without setting off any alarms. Once inside, I dropped down and slipped into the shadows. The facility was eerily quiet, the hum of machinery the only sound. I moved cautiously, staying out of sight as I navigated the maze of corridors. I found myself in what appeared to be a control room. Rows of monitors displayed live feeds from surveillance cameras, and a large map on the wall highlighted key locations: cities, military installations, and what looked like critical infrastructure hubs across Europe and Asia. On one of the screens, I saw Damien. He was standing in a brightly lit room, speaking to a group of men. The camera's angle didn't allow me to hear what he was saying, but his body language was commanding, confident. Whatever he was planning, it was happening now. I searched the control room for anything I could use to piece together his plan. In one of the filing cabinets, I found a dossier labeled Phase Omega Directive. The contents were chilling: detailed plans for coordinated cyber attacks, sabotage missions, and false flag operations designed to destabilize governments and create widespread chaos. This wasn't just about me or Sophia. Damien was engineering a global crisis. As I stuffed the dossier into my bag, an alarm blared, jolting me from my thoughts. They knew I was here. The room filled with the sound of boots pounding against metal floors. I drew my weapon and positioned myself behind a console, my mind racing. I couldn't let them capture me. Not with what I just uncovered. The first guard entered, his flashlight sweeping the room. I fired a single shot, hitting him in the shoulder and sending him crashing to the floor. The others hesitated, giving me just enough time to dart out of the room and into the hallway. Bullets ricocheted off the walls as I sprinted toward the exit. I needed to escape with the dossier, but the guards were closing in fast. My lungs burned as I pushed myself harder, weaving through the labyrinth of corridors. I rounded a corner and collided with someone. Damien. Our eyes locked, and for a moment, time seemed to freeze. He looked surprised but not alarmed, as if he'd expected this meeting all along. "Carter," he said, his tone calm despite the chaos. "You're persistent. I'll give you that." I raised my weapon, my hands trembling with a mix of rage and exhaustion. "This ends now." Damien raised his hands, a faint smile playing on his lips. "You think killing me will stop this? You have no idea how far this goes. Pull the trigger if it makes you feel better, but it won't change a thing." "Why, Damien?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "Why cause all this destruction?" "Because the world needs to burn before it can be rebuilt," he said simply. "The systems you defend are broken, Carter. I'm just lighting the match." The sound of guards approaching snapped me out of my trance. Damien saw my hesitation and took a step closer. "You're not my enemy, Carter. You're just a tool they're using, just like they used Sophia." Damien's words hung in the air, charged with an almost hypnotic certainty. My finger hovered over the trigger, the weight of the gun feeling both empowering and crushing at the same time. The sound of the guard's boots grew louder, echoing down the hallway. I had mere seconds to act. You don't get to justify this, I said, my voice sharp but trembling. You don't get to destroy lives and call it rebuilding. Damien smirked faintly, his hands still raised. You think this world is fair? The systems you protect, they chew up people like you, like Sophia, and spit them out. I'm not the villain here. I'm the only one who sees the truth. Then prove it, I snapped, taking a step forward, my gun still trained on him. Stop running, stop hiding behind chaos. Show me this truth you're so desperate to preach. He tilted his head, studying me as though weighing my worth. You want the truth? Fine, come with me. But understand this, you won't walk away the same. I hesitated. The guards were seconds away now. If I killed Damien, I could stop his operation here and now. But if I let him take me deeper into this web of lies, I might finally get the answers I'd been chasing. My hand tightened around the gun. Carter, make your choice, Damien said, his voice calm and assured. Because if you don't, they'll make it for you. I took a deep breath, lowering my weapon. Lead the way. Damien nodded, a glint of approval in his eyes. He turned and led me down a narrow corridor, away from the approaching guards. I kept my weapon ready, my every instinct screaming at me to stay alert. We slipped through a hidden passage that opened into a stairwell. As we descended, the cold air grew heavier, and the hum of machinery filled the silence. We entered a large underground chamber, the walls lined with computer servers and surveillance equipment. At the center of the room was a massive digital display showing a world map, marked with flashing red zones across major cities. Damien approached the display, his posture casual yet commanding. This, he said, gesturing to the map, is the world as it is, fractured, corrupt, and unsalvageable. Every red zone represents a system of control, financial hubs, communication networks, military installations. They're the arteries of a broken organism. And you want to sever them? I asked, my voice heavy with disbelief. No, Damien replied, his tone sharp. I want to replace them. This isn't just destruction, Carter, it's creation. A new world order, free from the chains of outdated power structures. I shook my head, anger flaring. And how many innocent people will die in the process? How many Sophias will you sacrifice? Damien's expression darkened. Sophia was a casualty of the old system, a system that used her and discarded her when she became inconvenient. You think you're avenging her by stopping me? No, Carter, you're avenging the very thing that killed her. His words hit me like a hammer, the weight of their implication crushing. Could he be right? Had I been fighting for a system just as corrupt and manipulative as Damien claimed? I clenched my fists, my resolve wavering. Enough talking, I said. What's your next move? Damien smiled. You're standing in it. The final phase isn't about destruction. It's about transition, and it begins tonight. Before I could respond, an alarm blared through the chamber, and the digital display began flashing red. Damien's expression shifted to one of annoyance rather than panic. They're here, he muttered. Your people. Suddenly, the room filled with armed operatives, their weapons trained on both of us. At the forefront was Ashford, her face a mask of determination. Carter, step away from him, she ordered, her voice firm. I glanced at Damien, then back at Ashford. He knows things. Things we need to understand before this gets worse. Ashford shook her head. He's a terrorist, Carter. There's no negotiation here. Damien smirked, taking a step forward. And there it is, the truth you've been chasing, Carter. They don't want answers. They want control. Shut up, Ashford barked, her weapon aimed squarely at his chest. I felt my heart pounding, torn between the two forces standing before me. Damien's claims, though radical and terrifying, carried a certain logic that gnawed at my certainty. Ashford represented the system I had once believed in, but now I questioned its motives. Carter, step aside, Ashford commanded again, her tone icy. My hand tightened around my weapon, my mind racing. I had to make a choice, and I had to make it now. The weight of the decision pressed down on me, the air between Ashford and Damien crackling with tension. I stood in the middle of two opposing forces, both claiming righteousness, both asking for my allegiance. In that moment, I realized the truth. Neither side had all the answers. Both were part of a larger, fractured system. I raised my weapon, pointing it at Damien. His smirk faded, replaced by a look of resignation. "Carter," he said calmly, "think carefully. You're about to become just another pawn in their game." "Maybe," I said, my voice steady, "but I'm done with games." Before anyone could react, I pivoted, firing a single shot into the power console at the center of the room. Sparks flew, and the massive digital display flickered before plunging the chamber into darkness. A chorus of shouts erupted as chaos engulfed the space. I moved quickly, ducking into the shadows as both Damien's men and Ashford's operatives scrambled to regain control. The sound of gunfire echoed through the chamber, and I knew I didn't have much time. I had disrupted both sides, buying myself a sliver of freedom. I slipped through a side passage, my steps quick and calculated. My mind raced as I pieced together my next move. The dossier, the notebook, the intel I'd gathered. All of it painted a picture of a world spiraling toward chaos, driven by factions vying for dominance. I couldn't trust Damien, and I couldn't trust Ashford. The only person I could rely on was myself. The passage led to an emergency exit that opened into the freezing night air. I emerged into the wilderness, the distant hum of helicopters growing louder. They'd be searching for me soon, but I had no intention of being found. I made my way to a hidden extraction point I had memorized earlier, a secluded landing site where a small civilian aircraft was waiting. The pilot, a local contact I had paid generously, looked up as I approached. "Where to?" he asked, his voice gruff. "Anywhere but here," I said, climbing into the aircraft. As the plane lifted off, I looked out over the dark landscape below. The facility was a distant glow on the horizon, its fate sealed in the chaos I had left behind. For the first time in months, I felt a strange sense of clarity. Months later, I sat in a small apartment in Istanbul, the city's chaotic beauty a fitting backdrop for my new life. The black notebook lay open on the desk in front of me, its cryptic notes and coordinates still a puzzle I was determined to solve. I had no allegiance now, no one pulling my strings. For the first time, I was free to chart my own course. I thought of Sophia, of her laughter, of the betrayal that had set this journey in motion. Her memory was both a weight and a beacon, guiding me as I worked to untangle the threads of the conspiracy that had taken her life. I wasn't a pawn anymore. I wasn't a player in their game. I was something else entirely, an unbound force, operating in the shadows but answering to no one. Damien's words still echoed in my mind. "You're not my enemy, Carter. You're just a tool they're using." Not anymore. I closed the notebook and stood, the bustling city outside my window alive with possibility. I had no illusions of fixing the world, but I could make sure no one used me again. If they wanted to play their games, I'd be ready. I had become the one thing they all feared, a rogue element. And I wasn't done yet.